The most transactional president in history is trying a new mafia-style tactic to force companies to do something that could be against their own interests, their shareholders' interests, and their customers' interests, but sure is in the interest of Donald Trump.
There's a whole number of very large companies, including Apple and Amazon and others, that have not sought reimbursements yet for the tariffs. Meaning they haven't tried to collect refunds. And from what I understand, part of the reason that they have waited is because there is a worry about, frankly, offending you. Would you find it offensive for them to try to collect a refund?
I think it's brilliant if they don't do that. I actually think if they don't do that, they got to know me very well. I'm very honored by what you just said. If they don't do that, I'll remember them.
If they don't do that, I'll remember them. That is some mob boss talk right there. That is the President of the United States directly pressuring companies not to claim the refunds to which they are legally entitled for unconstitutional and illegal tariffs that they were charged. Kind of like if you were entitled to a tax refund, but you were encouraged by the government not to take it. It's the same kind of pressure that Donald Trump tried and failed to put on the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, to push him to lower interest rates to compensate for the hit that Trump's tariffs were taking on the economy. And when Powell refused, Trump's Justice Department launched a criminal investigation against him that is so blatantly politically motivated that one retiring Republican senator is deliberately holding up the confirmation of Donald Trump's pick to be the next chairman, Kevin Warsh, until the Powell investigation is dropped.
If this investigation, which on its face looks bogus, wasn't happening, we'd be voting to send Mr. Warsh out of committee next week or the week after, and he'd be seated by the 15th. And that's still possible if we just get past this bogus investigation.
But Trump won't give up the ghost, not even after a federal judge threw out federal subpoenas for Powell for being baseless. Jeanine Pirro's office sent federal prosecutors to the construction site at the Federal Reserve headquarters in an unannounced visit. They were refused access, but some senators still care about the Fed's independence, and Kevin Warsh has done very little to convince them that he didn't promise to do Trump's bidding to get the job.
You said to Senator Kennedy that President Trump never demanded you to cut interest rates in your job interview. Is that your sworn testimony?
That is, Senator.
Okay. Well, someone here is lying then, because it's either you or President Trump. Because in an interview with the Wall Street Journal of December 12th, President Trump confirmed that he pressed you on your commitment to support interest rates cuts.
Senator, there's, of course, a third alternative. You cite a couple of reporters for a leading financial newspaper. I recall reading that story at the time.
Did you issue a correction?
I think those reporters either need better sources or better journalist standards.
Yes, it's the journalist's fault. Joining us now is Ron Insana. He is a veteran journalist and the author of The Message of the Markets on Substack. Ron, thank you for being with us. Kevin Warsh, not everybody knows his name. He's on the Fed. He's Trump's nominee for Fed chair. I remind people Jerome Powell was Trump's nominee for Fed chair. He likes to say that Joe Biden made him the chair. He didn't. On paper, Kevin Warsh meets the standards, which is quite something for senior officials in this government. He actually does. But Kevin Warsh, in his time on the Fed, has voted in a way that supports Donald Trump. I mean, he's sort of out of line with the mainstream thinking on the Fed to start with. So this idea that he's somehow some independent maverick doesn't hold up to what little scrutiny we already have.
Well, he was a maverick in the sense, and I was talking to Kevin during the depths of the financial crisis in 2008 when he was opposed to Federal Reserve Chair then Ben Bernanke lowering interest rates to zero, engaging in what we called unconventional monetary policies to save the banking system and prop up the U.S. economy. Kevin was worried about inflation at a time when we were going through a massive deflationary event and was wrong, really, on the arc of inflation in the 10 or 12 years after that. So in that sense, Ali, he was a maverick. He was a maverick on the wrong side. Now, if he wants lower interest rates, he'd be doing so when inflation is above target, stock market is near all-time highs, and not an environment in which you would typically lower interest rates without threatening to accelerate inflation going forward. So maverick in one sense, but certainly not in the sense that we often understand it.
So, Ron, you and I are pretty old, but we're not old enough to have been reporters during the last period in which inflation was a real massive threat to the
Correct.
actual underpinnings of the American economy. So people don't remember that this is super dangerous. I also would like lower interest rates. I think, generally speaking, people like lower interest rates. It allows them to borrow. It encourages them to spend. They buy houses. Factories expand. There are lots of good reasons to have lower interest rates. But, boy, is inflation a hard problem to solve if it gets out of control.
Yeah, and then what you're alluding to here, actually started in 1966 and lasted until 1981. I was just looking at a stat today that I think people forget just how dramatic inflation was in the early 80s, particularly, again, if one, you weren't covering it, or two, you weren't living it. The average mortgage in 1981, conventional 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, got as high as 18.6%. So inflation gets out of control, as it did during that period. In 1980, inflation was 13%, unemployment was 11%, short-term interest rates were 20.5%, as then Chairman Paul Volcker was trying to crush inflation. By doing so, created two very large recessions. This is something you don't want to get out of control. You don't want to run away. And this is an environment in which lowering interest rates at a time where, as I said earlier, inflation is above expectations, there's no strong justification as yet for Kevin Warsh's argument that we're going to go through some big productivity boom that's going to lower inflation on its own and give the Fed leeway to cut rates over time.
Yeah, it'd be nice if that were true. Ron, this business about Donald Trump's conversation with Andrew Ross Sorkin, in which he basically said, I'll remember companies that don't ask for the refunds to which they're entitled. There's a portal open now. Companies can go and apply for their refunds. That's a weird thing to say.
Yeah, it's an inverse pay to play, right? If you don't take the money that I lawfully owe you, you're my friend, as opposed to, pay me and I'll do this for you. And that may be happening in other parts of the government, as we've seen, over the last 15 months or so. But yeah, it is, as you suggested, very much a strong arm tactic of sorts. He had a slightly gentler touch with regard to that particular topic, but he's saying, don't take the money and I'll be your friend. And that's not something we have historically heard from presidents, certainly not out loud.
Ron, nice to see you as always. Thank you for joining me, my friend. Ron Insana is a veteran financial journalist, is the author of The Message of the Markets on Substack.